Hi there, I'm Robert Thiemann. I'm the founder of Frame. Welcome to Frame Live. Today we're going to talk about beauty retail. Beauty retail has led the retail sector over the past 5 years when it comes to innovation. But with its emphasis on intimacy, experience, and personal attention, it's also a sector that's facing a highly uncertain future post-pandemic. How have consumer mindsets shifted over the past half year? How did people react to the pandemic? And what does that mean for the design of beauty retail? I'm going to talk with that about Christopher Skinner, the founder and principal of New York-based creative agency Schoolhouse. Christopher, please unmute. There you are. Welcome.
Hi, Robert.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing? I'm good.
I'm fine. I'm excited. It's an interesting sector. You read a lot about beauty. This morning I read that the beauty scene, and especially China, is changing dramatically, and China will be the most important beauty market within, I think, 3 or 4 years from now. You're at the other end of the world, but I'm sure that you can say a thing or two that will also be relevant for the Chinese beauty market. So tell us first a little bit more about yourself and about Schoolhouse. You specialize in beauty retail. What is it that Schoolhouse does?
Well, thank you so much for having me, Robert, and thank you for the introduction. And yes, Schoolhouse, we're 5 years old, so we're quite young. We're focused on a narrow industry, which is beauty, which allows us to be wider in our capability set. So we have experience in strategy branding, content creation, industrial design, and architectural design, which is what we're talking about today. And while we're young, we've had an opportunity to really bring physical spaces to life for a variety of brands. We've done 3 spaces with L'Occitane, 2 of which we'll talk about today. We've created spaces for Yves L'Homme, La Mer, MAC, Nature Collection, Elemis, Bare Minerals. I mean, we've done a lot over the past 5 years, and my experience comes from the brand side. I studied at SCAD in Georgia, and I was literally looking for a part-time job, hired at Sephora to stock and clean shelves, and thus my love relationship with beauty began. And so I've really gotten to experience beauty from the ground floor up to what we're doing today. And that has really built a instinct for it and a gut feeling for the category, the consumer, that allows us to shift and pivot as it pivots around us. And 2020 has certainly been quite the pivot for all of us.
So can we have a look at some of the projects that you designed lately?
Yeah, of course.
Let's start with Yves L'Homme.
Beautiful store. So this is actually in Hong Kong. This is in Harbor City. It's a very small, very odd shaped store. It's actually a pie. And I think it's important to sort of step back, and I'm constantly inspired by how designers, architects kind of start that initial inspiration. You know, what is that sort of spark that gets them thinking, that gets them physicalizing things? For me, I grew up in a family of storytellers. My father's a novelist, and there's a lineage of storytellers on my father's side of the family. And for me, I always start with story. And we think about these spaces as having a backstory. You know, it's almost like an actor and the preparation that they do. You don't see that preparation on the stage, but you certainly feel it. And that's sort of what we try to do in the physical spaces. So this space, Yves L'Homme, this was the end of a long strategy work and a visual identity project that ultimately sort of defined Yves L'Homme as representing the luxury of refusal, because she started the brand 30 years ago. She had a single SKU. She did a lot of things unconventionally. So with their retail presence, we said every space that Yves L'Homme will open should refuse one element as it relates to the context of its surroundings. And this space opening in Hong Kong, you know, a very visually, auditorially loud place, actually refuses noise. So you can see there's sort of these peach felt panels that actually create the overall interior architecture. They sort of wrap themselves in a cocooning way around you, very similarly to her first balm cleanser and the muslin cloth. And everywhere that the cleansing or cleanser appears, we utilize green because it represents the first formula color of her balm cleanser. And so these are things that a consumer won't be able to point out and connect, but the thoughtfulness behind it, you certainly feel. And that's what we try to do in all of the spaces, Eve Lom being the first example of that.
Mm-hmm. And then a second one would be L'Occitane. You designed a couple stores for L'Occitane. This is in Flatiron. This is a completely different brand, and indeed it looks completely different. And that brings me to the next question, which is, if you specialize in this field, you work for competing companies.
Yes.
Isn't that a problem sooner or later?
Well, it's actually it's more of an opportunity for success, because we understand beauty beyond the surface level, empowerment, confidence. We understand it, all the way down to what it means in every single category. And when you understand sort of the playing field and all of the gray space that's taken, you can immediately start identifying that white space. And we often get that question of, what are you doing to sort of maintain privacy and the sensitivity of our materials? And ultimately, there's a lot of siphoning of teams, heavy NDAs, but also, that's our power. We understand what's happening in this industry, which allows us to work with a brand to really frame something completely different for the brand we're talking to.
Mm-hmm. So if we can go back to the slide again, what are we looking at here? What is Flatiron even?
So Flatiron is a location in Manhattan. It's like kind of right in the center of Manhattan in the 20 range. And there's a lot of things happening in retail there. It's sort of a coming together of food experiences, beauty experiences, fashion experiences. This is where Italy is located. So there is a destinational quality to it. And with L'Occitane, this is a prime example of a retailer through and through that allowed operational thinking, functional mindset, ease of maintenance to start to take precedence over real localization and hands-on experience. And so our role with L'Occitane was to come in and really create flagship anchors for the brand to constantly mine inspiration from. And so Flatiron for us really represents the story of the alchemy of Provence. I always say that I think L'Occitane has done a fantastic job really creating this postcard Provence. It's the wheelbarrow of flowers and the baskets. The alchemy of Provence is more about the stretching of time that you experience in Provence, the sort of communal flavors of it. And so the space is broken into a sort of market space, an interior home, a back garden. And there's also a lot of digital elements that start to cater to that younger generation the brand is going after. An example is you can see one of our actual architectural designers utilizing this screen here. It's the world's first beauty fitting room. It was inspired by what we were seeing happening in fashion, where you're ordering colors and sizes. Here, you're actually able to order testers directly to your station, and each has a sink and towels, so you can have an autonomous experience, which we've seen younger generations go after. Mm-hmm. So this space, because of its Manhattan location, it's about, if you have 2 minutes, you can get what you need. If you have a longer extension of time, it ends actually in a spa at the back for those that want to spend a half a day.
And the next project is another L'Occitane in a different space. And it looks completely different, but how does it differ in terms of functionality and operation?
Yeah, so this space is in Canada. It's actually located in a mall, so very different sort of mindset of walking down the streets of Manhattan and popping into a store versus getting in your car, driving to the mall, parking, getting out. That kind of experience of getting to the destination is different. I grew up going to malls, so when I hear the terrible news about the malls in America, I just, a part of me cries, because I just loved going to the mall. It was sort of like, it was like a mini Universal Studios, of all of the brick and mortar storefronts sort of dressed theatrically to their destination. And so this store, we really wanted to lean into kind of the theatricality of Provence. It's such an incredible region. There's such magic that happens there. I mean, it gives way to some of the most amazing scents, the most amazing, palatable tastes. And so everything is all about kind of magic and wonderment. Things sort of react to you in the space. You can see this sort of dome structure. You put your hands under and all of a sudden it starts raining, and that's how you experience scrubs and body washes. You can see there's a fragrance table where we took humidified air and mixed it with their essential oils, and you have these fragrance clouds that envelop you to showcase their top fragrances. So it's all about experience baked into the product. And I think as experiential designers or architectural designers, we've sort of fallen into this trap of, experience happens in one place and product happens in another. And I want to continue to challenge us to sort of, how do we weave these things together? Because ultimately that's what these spaces need to be. They need to be both transformational and transactional, and the two are not mutually exclusive. They can live with one another.
And the last example shows La Mer. And this looks rather futuristic. I started this talk with saying that beauty retail has been at the forefront of innovation for the last couple of years. Is this such an example that it looks quite innovative? So what is happening in this space? It looks really experiential.
Robert, I have to say, I love how you say La Mer. I'm very jealous of the way that you pronounce that. So you really elevated it.
Being European, and I'm not even French.
Yeah, so this is really, this experience opened last October. It opened in China, in Shanghai. And it was a 10,000 square foot exhibition for the brand that was actually located in a location called the Power Station of Art. It's the first China state-run art museum. And it truly is an art museum. Like Li Yufan was displayed next door. So we really knew that the stakes were high because it wasn't about this sort of shareable bait that we've seen in other experiential destinations. Also in China, the sort of digitalization of everything is not innovation anymore. We've seen the big screens, we've seen the projections. And so I really felt that there is an opportunity to physicalize experience and mix that with digital. So it's a 10,000 square foot space. Everything is interactive. And there's a mixture of physical interaction and digital interaction that really break down the story of La Mer. You have the sort of crashing waves, you have the kelp. On that top right image, you're seeing this sort of installation inspired by Sea and Sky, which is the founding impulse of the brand. Max Huber was a studier of the stars and looked to the sea after he experienced a burn, obviously with the kelp. And so you're seeing this sort of physical silk that's actually being moved by fans, and the fans are connected to sensors. So as you move around the space, the fans are changing and shifting with lighting, and you're changing this sort of sea-inspired wave. And so it was about, how do you kind of create interaction and storytelling art in a way that gets people to better understand sort of the aha moments that make the brand of La Mer so, special and unto its own in terms of prestige and luxury.
You speak about experiences, interaction, intimacy. You see people together, interacting with each other. This all has come to a sort of an end now because of the pandemic. And this is why you've been doing research into how people's mindsets have been altered by the pandemic. Can you tell us a little bit more about these shifting consumer mindsets?
Of course. I'm a huge believer that the best creativity comes out of context and comes out of listening to build that context. You have to really understand the end user and where they're at and meet them there. And, obviously we're constantly seeing and hearing about the future of retail, the future of retail, the future of retail. And people are throwing darts at the dartboard trying to figure it out. And what I've seen over the past year is this incredible shift toward physical precautions and safety measures. And absolutely, I respect that because we need to make sure people are safe. But as I've told my team, as I continue to tell myself, throughout this pandemic is that this is not forever, this is for now. And there will be this, resurgence and desire to get back to physicality. And honestly, America is challenged in the pandemic and, it's constant resurgent because we don't want to give up physicality. We want to maintain closeness to each other, the sort of physicality of restaurants, cafes, malls, bars, etc. And so I wanted to go a level deeper with the team. And I have to give a shout out to Sebastian Vandenberg and Moj Mateen, who are the two architects that really drove and did all of the design work. By no means is this, a one-man show. I'm upheld, and I continue to also uphold incredible designers that are doing all of this great work. So I want to, give a shout out to them. But we really started by digging deep and saying, great, we understand 6 feet, we understand masks, we understand airflow, we understand antimicrobial surfaces, but we've got Black Lives Matter movement happening. We've got this social division, we've got civil unrest, we've got a kind of decline in trust of public institutions, this idea and this constant concern of what is real and what isn't real. Am I hearing the right thing? Am I hearing the wrong thing? And what we've found in our research, and we do continuous quantitative, qualitative research in various projects on our own, but also at the end of the day, we're all humans. This is human experience, and we can't divide the consumer from the designer because we've all seen that we're in this together. And so we've had open conversations of how this year has made us feel. And, when we think about it, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of vulnerability. I can tell you, I've had multiple moments, and I know many others that have, where you stand in the mirror and you really, you start to dig deep in, why am I doing what I'm doing? Does this make me happy? Do I want to continue to do this? Now is the time to sort of take a change. And what does that look like? I mean, I think this is something we're all experiencing. And for us to just build physical retail around safety precautions and not this kind of like vulnerability we're experiencing with ourselves is just, designing blindly. We're not considering the emotional context. And experience is all about charging emotion. You go to Six Flags, Universal Studios, or Disneyland to experience and charge emotions in yourself. And so we always start from that emotional thinking. And so, we've outlined some emotional mindsets, that lack of comfort, this sort of fatigue of anticipation, behavioral mindsets like social divides and broken systems and limited and lack of information. Sorry, Robert.
Can we see the slide that kind of shows a little bit more about what you're saying right now, because you go really fast, and I appreciate that. I would like to give our audience the time to better understand what you're saying, because I completely agree. So
sorry, it's the New Yorker in me. I'm talking a mile a minute.
You can yes, see so, from a distance that you're from a family of storytellers.
So you're seeing here the emotional mindsets, the behavioral mindsets that we broke down, and these are available also in the articles on frameweb.com. And what we started to say was, how can physical spaces really create more positive pathways? How can spaces create confidence, create healing, provide stimulation, provide convenience for people? How can spaces actually be a part of social action and justice? We see people on the streets, we see them in the parks. Why are they not in our physical, spaces? Why are they not invited into brand spaces to sort of be voicing their concerns, their opinions? How can spaces start to be more community centric? I live in Greenwich Village in Manhattan, and I'm experiencing something I think we're all experiencing, and that's really the bleeding of the fabric of our community through the loss of restaurants, bars, bookstores, retail spaces, mom and pop shops. And of course, this opens the way for new thinking, but we have to think differently if we want it to be new. And so, these new spaces opening next year really have a tall order. And so, we really think that through this approach, we can evolve retail for beauty beyond just, offering destinations that consumers use because, it's what they want. And they really start to become resources that they choose. because it really helps them get to where they want to go. And brands every day are trying to infiltrate themselves into the lives of consumers. And we see that happening in social, through influencer marketing, through digital. That has to happen in our physical spaces. They cannot just be transactional anymore.
You take, let's say, unwanted feelings, feelings of depression, feelings of anxiety, feelings of being not included as the starting point for retail design. That feels like quite a daring move. How do you convince brands to go along with you?
Well, I mean, I can tell you just personally, I've experienced a lot of loss this year. One of my greatest personal fears is the lack of control. And this year has just thrown that in my face. And because of that, I felt myself sort of falling apart. And the only way to move forward is to be vulnerable with yourself and really say, look, this is what I'm facing. This is what I want. And I need to be honest and truthful with myself as a person to get me there. A brand has to do the same thing. A brand has to really knock down the barriers within itself and between a consumer and itself to sort of say, we don't have all the answers. We need your support. We need your help. And going back to what I was saying earlier, brands constantly want to be involved in people's lives, and people's lives right now are vulnerable. And thus, to reflect that, we have to be vulnerable ourselves. And that starts to create connection, belonging, and it ladders up to these words we hear a lot, like community. And you don't just get a community. We all know how hard it is to make friends in all of the stages of our lives. You have to be open, you have to be vulnerable to create that belonging with one another, to build that community. And I think as businesses, as brands, we sort of think we can just buy community, we can just get there. And I think what we've seen is that consumers are really putting their thumb on us and saying, you have to be held accountable to do this the way that I'm doing this as a consumer if you want to be in my life. And it's not easy, and what I've experienced personally is not easy this year, but I can tell you that I'm better for it. And I think brands will start to experience that betterment as well.
So you came up with these shifting consumer mindsets, speaking about behavior and emotions, and you came up with pathways for retail to address those feelings. In the next section of this Frame Live talk, we'll be speaking about archetypes, that you came up with, addressing the future of beauty retail. Let's start with the first archetype, which is called Flex, and it's addressing the desire for flexibility in a beauty context. That's been paramount over the past year. You cannot do business anymore just thinking that everything will go forward as it always has been going forward. You have to kind of be ready for disruption. So how did you harness this? It's not a trend, this phenomenon, and what does flex mean?
Right. So I think, to take a step back, I want to say that these are archetypes, meaning these are places to pull inspiration from. These are by no means just, the physicality of things that you just start to then plop into your own thing. Each brand sort of has to do its own digging. But what we wanted to do was put forth ideas, these sort of archetype ideas that allow a continuation of thought, not the definitive nature of thought. And so flex is exactly what you're saying, Robert. It's, we've experienced sort of a fast changing world around us. We've also experienced in our lives physical space. I can tell you the space I'm sitting in is a gym. It's my office. It's a hangout space. It's where I invite people over. I mean, we've seen our own physical spaces flex and do everything that we need from them. And we quite often hear these buzzwords like localization and hyper-localization, but then you go into the store and fixtures are bolted down and hardwired, and it's sort of lost in its design. And so flex, if you really think about it simplistically, it's almost like a theatrical proscenium. Theaters are built to flex based upon the story that they are meant to tell. And they're not just built around a singular story. They're built around pulleys and systems and traps and things that move and adjust in order to show the best version of the story it can. And so this space, we really thought, you know, how can we have floor to ceiling curtains that get pulled, engaged and disengaged, swinging archways, thresholds, things that pivot on XY axes so that spaces can become large and then become compartmentalized. And then also, how can spaces start to flex, not just seasonally, which we've seen incredible retailers do, like Merci and Colette, you know, the lost Colette, but how can they flex weekly? How can they flex like daily? How can a space be different in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening? Because we are all different in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. We're all experiencing and wanting different things. So how can those kind of change depending upon those behaviors? And so you're just seeing kind of ideology around things that are able to engage, be pulled in, disengaged, be pulled away. And ultimately, it's really about this sort of space sharing resource model where things can live short-term, things can live long-term, you know, things can overlap with one another. And I think it's important to say that all these things obviously have the other elements that are important for transactional retail, like buying online and picking up in store, and hygiene and airflow and antimicrobial services. But this space is really about this ever-evolving model that allows itself to change in the context of time, service, product, and purpose.
So this flexibility is first and foremost physical flexibility, things moving around, objects moving around, curtains I see opening and shutting. It's a very, in a way, it's a very precise design I'm looking at. You can imagine a brand moving in, but I guess it needs to be open enough for it to be picked up by a multitude of brands. So how can you personalize a design or an idea like this if you're L'Occitane or if you're La Mer, for instance? What would the outcome be like, and how would that differ from each other?
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that, you know, with each of the archetype design work that we did, you know, we used very simple color blocking and color forms to start to just differentiate themselves. Obviously, these things have to be identified and branded depending upon the retailer or the mono brand that you're working with. But I think it's back to that analogy of the theatrical proscenium. You know, you can bring elements in that start to story tell the moment of La Mer or the moment of L'Occitane without actually, you know, building an entirely new proscenium, without building an entirely new building. And also the power of true branding starts to codify things in a way that they become recognizable. So you don't necessarily have to, you know, completely dress everything up. If you have a really strong visual code and system of a brand, you should be able to put one or two elements in that all of a sudden engage it in a totally new way for that brand specifically.
It feels like the perfect blueprint for a pop-up.
Yeah, I mean, I think this pop-up, this idea of flexibility, short-term leasing, I mean, that's what we want. I mean, we want stimulation coming out of this, right? I mean, that's something we're all craving right now, is stimulation. And I think that's why it's been so hard to shy away from the stimulation we have always gone to and have always, you know, wanted in our lives. And so this idea that things can change quickly and keep energy up and pulse in and out will keep people coming back, because that stimulation is naturally built into the architecture.
How much does this ask from the store manager and the staff? And how much?
I mean,
yeah, sorry. Yeah. And how much does it? How much of this, let's say, this flexibility comes from you as a designer or an agency?
It's all through and through. You know, I'm really glad that you actually brought that up, because I'm a huge believer that, I mean, obviously I was a stock associate and then a salesperson. So like, I understand that my presence in a physical space changes the overall, you know, space itself. And so, you know, that has to be baked into how you start to think about things. You know, we've been really good about kind of thinking about digital experiences and customer service and live chats, and all of that is all now physicalized in a space and needs to be as structured in values and mission and purpose as much as those digital elements are. And so it asks a lot, as anything, deploying a brand asks of its people.
Cool. So let's have a look at how technology can play a role in beauty retail, and especially when it comes to service. This is your second archetype. What's it about?
I think, at the end of the day, I personally, and I'm sure others out there are longing to be taken care of, and retail has this ability, specifically beauty. I mean, beauty has a way of making you feel taken care of. I mean, I remember being just in simple department stores where someone pulls you over, they cleanse your face, they tone it, they moisturize it. Very simple things you do to yourself at home. But there's something about someone else doing that with you, for you, that makes you feel taken care of. And Service Hub is really all about that. I think where we want to see this go is really about this sort of fourth industrial revolution, this sort of breaking down the human, the digital, the biological in a way that brings those elements all together. And so you're seeing, things from services that are built on human to human connection to things that are, robotically transferred. But also there can be opportunities for those elements to work together. Who's to say that if I'm an esthetician doing something, that I don't have a light over me that censors my hand movements and is moving with me, that betters my experience and thus the experience of the consumer. And so it's the bridging of these elements together that really start to create kind of Service Hub at its best. And we might, we have in there this idea of buying online, picking up in-store vending machines, this idea of the old school automats might start coming back, where you really, you're not having to necessarily interact with humans all the time, and you're able to get what you need when you need it. Voice activated navigation, voice activated SKU details, all these things. And they feel very transactional, but they also become experiential. And I think those things you start to remember, and everything is built around this idea of feeling taken care of. And ultimately that's a response to apprehension that we've all feel, the sort of tiredness of this waiting for an answer, or the anxiety, slowly dulling our senses. This space is really about wrapping its arms around you. And you can even see that in the architecture itself. It feels like it's really holding you in and taking care.
You speak about experience, service, transaction, there's logistics. How do you say that? The back office of a store.
Back of house, yeah.
Back of house, exactly. Do you always need to squeeze that into one and the same space? I mean, there's been a lot of talking about retail splitting up all of these activities. And I can imagine, or we can imagine, a store that's only about logistics and click and collect. And we can imagine a store that's not even a store perhaps, but a store where it's all about experience, so a brand space. How do you see that in beauty?
Yeah, I think what I have learned as just kind of growing up in beauty, as things have changed, as social has come in, as e-commerce has begun to dominate, is the best brands think episodically. It's not about everything all at once. We're all obsessed with the Netflixes of the world because it's a series and each episode represents a moment in that series. And so we see brands executing that, where they're storytelling one element in social, and then another element in e-commerce, and then another element in consumer, customer service, and then another element in a receipt of the goods at home. We can think about our spaces the same way. We don't have to have a space. Digital is not just digital. It's a compilation of a lot of elements that live in a digital space. The physicality can be exactly the same thing. Who's to say that L'Occitane or a large brand doesn't identify areas where consumers need convenience, and thus it's about vending machines and no touch interaction, buy online, pick up, and you don't need to have window displays and all these things. And then identifying where that consumer goes for entertainment and for experience, and building out spaces there that cater to that. I mean, we have to think episodically. We have to think, where is the consumer? What are they needing? Because I can tell you, I click online and go, into the internet for something different than if I'm on my phone and social. And the same thing can be said in all of our physical locations as well. I'm uptown for something, I'm downtown for something else.
Right. Let's speak about the third archetype, which is all about a word that you have been using a couple times so far, community.
Yes,
It seems like the holy grail these days to grow a community.
People love saying they need a community.
Yes.
And like I said, community is it's a hard thing. I mean, think just, you know, in our personal lives, building community is something that some go through their whole lives without actually achieving. And you have to open up. Ultimately, that's what you need to do. You open up. And that's what this space is all about. It's about opening up. It's about inviting others in. It's not necessarily about every space is about transaction and retail and newness and bestsellers and this and that. It's about how can I find others that have adjacent and similar values and invite them in. And so we kind of started to create a space that really goes against this sort of like isolation and distress that consumers are feeling. And that starts to open itself to micro narratives of our local identities. And for those larger organizations that are experiencing success now, that have the opportunity to start building and rebuilding brick and mortar, call upon those local stores that we've lost this year. Make space for them. You know, if there are shared values, you can learn and gain from one another. And also, you know, all of the things happening with the Black Lives Matter movement coming out of, you know, the death of George Floyd, we can invite that conversation in. You know, we're inviting that conversation in social. You know, we're inviting that conversation in through philanthropy and partnerships in our brands. Why not start doing that in our physical spaces? Make space for those hard, vulnerable conversations for people. And that's really what about Community Collective is. It's about the vulnerability that lends to belonging, that builds community. And it's not about it's all mine and it's my space. It's about opening that up. I mean, think about your own personal space. When you have a community, you open up your space to that community. They come in, they stay the night, they, you know, stay there while you're gone. I mean, it's an open space for people. And I think as brands, if we want to include ourselves in every aspect of a consumer's lives, we have to open up and think about what are other things that are important in our consumers' lives, and let's bring those narratives in.
But I think that will be a fine line to walk, and it can become quite cynical if you speak about Black Lives Matter and at the very end there's a cash desk. You are, well, not supposed to, but invited to pick up a product and buy it. Do you understand what I mean? I mean, there's a fine line to be walked by these brands. So what would you advise brands like the ones that you're working for to open up to? It can't be anything, I suppose.
Yeah, I think every brand needs to determine its level of, you know, representative diversity and inclusivity. And ultimately, inclusivity is really about the opening up and the inviting in of, you know, those not often represented to the conversation. Diversity is just I have them at the table. You know, I think what we need from our physical spaces is inviting that conversation. And I think we're seeing this happening in social media. We're seeing those that have the platform, you know, spotlighting, and it doesn't always necessarily need to be at a protest level. It can be, you know, spotlighting Black-owned beauty businesses, Black-owned founders, trans-founded beauty businesses, all of these things, all of these communities and people that need our support in inclusion and representation. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be cynical. And it doesn't necessarily mean, okay, here's the checkout at the end of that experience. And I think we need to also be okay knowing that just as social, people are there for inspiration, and then they're also there for transaction. Our retail spaces need to feel and also be considered in the same way. Long gone are the days of it being a general store where everyone walking in needs to walk out with something. If they're walking out with a feeling for a brand, that's something enough. And that starts to ladder to that community that we often hear brands wanting.
But as a retail designer, you have limited influence on that. I think the influence of of a brand design agency? Or, I mean, you have to play that level at brand level and not only at a design level or retail level even. So how can you get to the right person within these brands if you're a retail designer?
Yeah, I think it's our job as designers to be courageous in our thinking. And look, it's not about it's not about waxing poetic our perspective on the world and how it can be better. It's about listening to how is the brand defining that for themselves. And there's so many things happening in the world. I mean, climate change. Now every brand needs to define for itself its role in sustainability and lessening of carbon footprint. We have to, I mean, I think the best designers are the best listeners. You know, they really sit and they understand and can start to define what is the problem. And how can then you use design to facilitate the solution? So, you know, I encourage all those that, you know, own agencies, that are designers in agencies, to continue to be thinking about this. But at the same time, you're right, it's about doing that through the lens of the brand. I mean, that's why at Schoolhouse, we're really brand people first. You know, we really understand brand, and that's manifestation into retail. And so we always start there, which is why we always start with story.
How do you advise brands where to enter into a conversation that's living in society in its broadest sense, or in a specific community that needs to be on this kind of conversation?
Yeah, I mean, it's the desires of a consumer constantly are shifting. And, you know, we're seeing now heavy conversations around pandemic, Black Lives Matter. And I'm speaking very specific to America too, you know, and then the election and all of these elements. Each brand, you know, as I was saying, needs to really start to define that for themselves and do it in a way that's thoughtful, that, you know, pushes the envelope, but at the same time is achievable. You know, I think we've heard consumers' outcries from brands that are just mirroring what they think consumers want to hear, but don't have the prowess nor the you know, affect to actually make that happen. And so you have to really be honest with yourself of, where am I at? Where do I want to go? And what are the levels that I can do to get me there? And it's not always all on the brand. I mean, we talk a lot about sustainability. There are things brands can own, but, you know, recycling of packaging, packaging can be the most recyclable thing in the world. But if the end user throws it in the trash, it's not recycled. So a brand can only do so much to inform, to educate, make decisions, but knowing also that it's a relationship, and there needs to be a level of, you know, communication between brand and consumer, and an understanding and a respect for what we can do, what you can do, and an exchange of that.
Let's move to the last archetype, the fourth one. And that's,
Robert, you love that one. You love community collective.
Yes, I'm. We're also trying to, well, we're building a community. We have a community, and we cater to that community, but it's a tricky path. How to open up, how to manifest our own thinking, how to include that community in whatever we are doing. We are learning by doing, but it's rather new to us, to be honest.
Yeah, and I honestly, I think that's okay. I mean, I think the people that we connect with, I mean, I always think about brands as people, because it's just easier for me to understand and digest. And ultimately, the people that we're drawn to are those that are themselves. You know, they're not mirroring what that they think we want from them. And you as a person can start to you feel that from someone when you're near someone and they're just saying the things that they think you want to hear. It's really about what am I bringing to the table, and just owning that. And I think that's what brands need to kind of get down to. It's not just about posting a black square because that's what we're doing this Tuesday. It's really about what can I do, and owning that, and then sort of saying, like, this is where I hope to get, but I'm not there yet. And just kind of owning that is honestly how you start to be vulnerable, and it ladders to all the things we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for that. It's very true. So let's take things to the next archetype, which is about well, physical and emotional well-being. It's called escape. Why?
Yes. um, this is my favorite one. I think at the end of the day, we have all been in our four walls and our roof, um, daydreaming and dreaming of spaces and places. I mean, think about, the consumption of media and, living vicariously through imagery and through stories and video. I mean, all of these things. And I really think there's an opportunity to start to physicalize that for people, to create moments of recharge, of recovery, and re-engagement that starts to get us out of these feelings of isolation and anxiety and fatigue. And so here, I mean, we really took a fantastical approach to blur those lines between realism and fantasy, to really, particularly to beauty, lean into and celebrate its escapism power. Beauty is obviously, it's an inside out. It can be everything from health and the health of my skin and the health of my diet and all of these things. But it also is an outward out. It's escaping, it's expressing, and it's also learning about yourself through that. And so, this sort of biophilic design starts to, reduce stress. It has, repeating elements, voluptuous architecture, very exaggerated, moments of fixture play. And, also this idea of plant life coming in and sort of being inspired by nature's kind of like healing movements, which is why you're seeing waterfalls and water. This really kind of is experience economy 2.0. It's this sort of utopia and this ecosystem that is emotionally connective. And at the end of the day, we're talking about retail. We're talking about spaces that pretend for themselves. Like you're walking into this huge building, and all of a sudden now I'm in Provence. Well, I know I'm not in Provence, but I'm there. I've escaped to that, and I have that feeling. And so I think there's something wonderful about that is very freeing, in retail design, because you can really escape. And that's really the role, beyond the convenience and the transaction. The role is to make people feel a certain way, and brands make you feel certain ways. That's why you surround yourselves with certain ones and don't surround yourselves with others.
How do these four archetypes work together? Can they work together? Should they work together?
I think so. I think there's, they're truly archetypes because they're thought pieces. And ultimately, a space can have flexibility and a sense of escapism. A space can have moments and, heavy moments of service, while supported by moments of belonging and community building. And I think by creating four archetypes, we're sort of saying this is a continuum. These are ideas that continue, and they're not a solid, successful footprint, which I feel sometimes in retail, we sort of try to say, what is the next solid ground that retail will be built on? It's not. We've created a world for ourselves where things are about change, and they're about evolution, and they're about, the next thing and the next thing and the best thing and the betterment of something. So retail and physical space needs to also be about that. And so by creating four, it means that there's more than four, and that the four can become one, or two can become one. And they're just by no means, a sort of stake in the ground of this is it. It's really about the ideology of thinking about behavior, thinking about human beings at the end of the day, and designing spaces and places for them, to get better and to be with one another.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that generally the opinion is that beauty retail is at the forefront of retail innovation, more than fashion, for instance?
Well, I have always been so honored to be in beauty, and I have always felt that it never got the spotlight. It always was fashion and beauty. And even, I mean, I remember going to the Strand bookstore, a famous bookstore in New York, and they have a section of fashion designers and this and that, and like all of the incredible things that these designers have done. And they have a beauty section, and it's like literally this wide. It's one shelf, and it's 12 books. And I think that beauty within ourselves as an industry, we have started to have a renaissance. We have invited new individuals in. I think last year, 1,000 brands were created in beauty, 1,000. I mean, it really is experiencing this renaissance, and it's becoming, almost a democracy in itself, in its own industry. And so I think it's at the forefront because it's experiencing the most change right now between fashion and beauty and accessories, et cetera, which is why all of a sudden every celebrity we know has a beauty brand, and influencers are creating beauty brands. I mean, which is fantastic because all of these individuals have a platform to better the world through beauty. And so it doesn't mean that it's better and that it's figured out retail better than fashion. It just means that the industry is experiencing a renaissance and is experiencing a little bit of a, whoa, this has more to offer than just toothpaste and cleansers. And that's, I mean, it's a fabulous time to be in beauty. And for those listening that aren't, I mean, it's a great industry to sort of study and want to get your hands on.
By the way, if there's somebody in the audience willing to ask a question, that's possible. Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom interface. So if you want to ask a question, please go ahead, and we have a little bit time left, so that would be great. If not, that's also fine. Christopher, it's been a joy to listen to you. You told me at the beginning, actually, before we started, that you would like to have sort of a final word for our audience. So
yeah,
here you go.
Okay, thank you, Robert.
Are you ready for that?
I'm ready. I'm so ready. I want to say, I know there's a lot of individuals listening, and I hear from designers all the time, young designers getting started, trying to sort of figure out like, what do I do next? And, existing designers sort of figuring out like, how do I make a pivot in all of this? And so I want to just take an opportunity to talk to you and just say, we are living through something that is very hard to live through. It's very hard to describe for ourselves. And we need to start breaking down this barrier between designer and consumer, and ultimately start to understand that we're all humans experiencing. And I've come from internal organizations, being on a retail side, on a brand side, and there are these divides in design, and there are divides between design and other industries, and we are humans experiencing. And so kind of call upon that. For those leaders on the call, I just ask that you continue to be courageous in the work and the leading that you're doing. And for those designers on the call, I ask that you continue to also be courageous to really create new and exciting experiences, because we have in front of us a platform for rediscovery and redefinition of a really important industry, retail, and within beauty for me specifically. And so as you're putting pen to paper and those new briefs are coming in, because they will come in, these spaces aren't going anywhere, they need to be utilized. I want you to spend less time focusing on what could go wrong and more time on what could go right in this new sort of thinking and this new ideology. I want you to really think about the end result of the consumer, and really listen to them and what they really need. And for those that have platforms, that have a team, that have a following, use your platform to pull others up and rest on it and, give them voices. And so I just want to say and recognize that it's not an easy time to be doing what we're doing. And I want you to really focus on the things you can control, learn from the experiences that you're having, whether you're a leader or you're a first-time designer in an agency. Because no matter what you're working on right now, it matters. And no matter what happens in the journey, you've got to never stop fighting for what you believe in. And remember that everything each day and every day will look different, and that's okay. And you need to, as a designer, be good to yourself, be good to others around you, and let that manifest in your work. because ultimately all the things I'm talking about are end result things, but it starts with us as individuals, whether we're designers, leaders, marketers, social influencers, et cetera. It starts with us. And so I just wanted to put that out there, because sometimes these things can feel very, here's the end result, when in actuality, the journey is what we have to learn from. So thank you, Robert, for letting me close on that.
Fantastic, Christopher. You're a very passionate man. It's really a pleasure to listen to you. You're thinking about an industry. You're thinking actually about two industries, and you're advocating for both of them. One is beauty retail, or maybe more in general retail, brand perspective, and you are an advocate for the design community as well. I mean, you don't. I'm being honest here. You're not promoting yourself. You're promoting two beautiful industries, and I love to be a part of that. And thank you for your emotional plea to our audience to stay taking risks, be daring, and enjoying the journey. I think that's very important. Christopher, let me wrap up what we have talked about today. We've talked about shifting consumer mindsets due to the pandemic, about people getting anxiety, feeling not included in conversations, excluded, feeling uncertain about the future, and how, as a retail designer and as a brand, you can address those feelings. You came up with 4 archetypes, addressing flexibility of space, addressing service from a retail perspective, addressing how to be part of a community in a genuine way, and how to offer moments of escape with retail spaces. Again, it's been a joy to listen to you. I have, in the meanwhile, seen that I've not been the only one. They're very, you left some people really inspired by your talk. Thank you again for that, Christopher. And I wish you the best of luck with realizing those archetypes. And I'm looking forward to those spaces, and I hope to be entering one of them anytime soon, or it will probably not be soon, but somewhere next year.
Well, thank you, Robert. I just want to say thank you. And I also want to recognize you, because you are one that has created a platform for us. So I do want to thank you for that, because without you, I wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be inviting me up onto yours and your audience, and you continue to do that for the design and specifically the spatial field. So thank you, and it's an honor to be doing this with you today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Christopher. There's actually one question now coming in. Shall we?
Sure.
Yeah, why not? That's from Judy Sue. The question is, there's a huge drive for integrating screens and digital experiences within spaces, retail spaces. What is your take on this, and how is your agency approaching that?
Yeah, I love this, Judy. Thank you. I mean, I think we just, yes, I get this as a part of the brief, the world's largest digital screen. That's what we want to have anchoring the store. I totally understand what you're talking about. I think at the end of the day, we have to continue to remind brands that we have Gen Z generation coming up that have grown up with screens in their hands. And the screens play a variety of functional roles in their lives. And so a screen is it's not a crutch anymore for retail, because it's nothing new anymore. So really think about, how can this screen play a function? And the function can purely be escapism and sort of, moments of nature that create moments of, respite, but really define the function of it, but beyond just the size and scale of it.
Fantastic. Impromptu, without rehearsing. Great. Thanks again, Christopher. Thanks, audience, for being with us today. This edition of Frame Live. I want to remind you that next week, the 8th of December, we will have another session with the jury of the Frame Awards November. We will speak about the winners and the honorable mentions of our Frame Awards platform. Next week, 8th of December, 4 o'clock in Europe, Amsterdam time. Hope to see you then for some insight into really special projects and some insights into trends that can be derived from looking deeply into more than 60 projects that have been submitted to the Frame Awards. Christopher, once again, thank you very much. Audience, great to have you here. I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.